Hello and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is our three-part series about Kambo. My husband and I did a trip to Peru specifically to go and meet the Kambo frog. And this is a three-part series. This is part 2. Last week, we talked about the 3x3 method. We talked about the water protocol and combining Western and indigenous practices so that we can enhance the healing of this medicine. This episode, we talk about what it was like meeting the frog, how intense the process is of making the Kambo sticks, going and finding the frog, extracting the medicine, the different ways that the medicine can be administered, and the physical, emotional, spiritual components of the medicine. So tune in also next week where we really deep dive into the medical considerations, the science of Kambo, and the contraindications. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. This is a topic that I'm absolutely super passionate about, and I want to thank you for being here today. I hope you'll enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast, a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-discovery. Our intention is to deliver insight and inspiration while fostering conversations that are genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. We hope you will enjoy today's episode. Hey, Adam, welcome back to the Connected Community Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. So Adam is my husband. We just did a podcast last episode about our experience going to the jungle, meeting the Kambo frog. What did we talk about? What didn't we talk about? We talked about why we went, what the experience was like, what it was like experiencing the medicine right off the frog's back versus off of a stick, which we had done before. We talked a little bit about the water protocol, which is absolutely the most important piece for people to understand, is not to consume too much water before that. Our next episode, we're going to go into medical considerations, contraindications, and the science of Kambo. So tune into that for sure. What else did we touch on last session?
We talked about the purge, about what are maybe some of the indications about what is coming out of you if you do have an upper purge, and what are the things to consider, what is maybe the BS of it, and what might be actually something to pay attention to, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
We
Well, and
talked
also the
about,
mix between like Western and indigenous cultures. I've been trained by both Western and indigenous. I think that there's a beautiful blending of both. I think that both have really good things to offer. And I think it's a mistake to say like one is absolutely correct and we're disregard the others. I think that there's pieces that can be disregarded from both and beautiful pieces that can be grabbed onto both. And so I do think that everyone practices a little bit differently. I do have to say I was trained with Tribal Detox in Creed, Colorado with Jason Fellows. It was absolutely excellent. I don't feel like the 5 days that we did the Kambo training in the jungle, I think had I left with only that, we got our certificate and we got trained. Had I not been trained through Tribal Detox first, I would have been completely at a loss of really how to serve people safely and properly. I think my training with Jason focused a lot about safety and contraindications and how to serve the medicine in a way with the Western world where we're everyone's coming to me on a list of medications that I need to look through. And that's not something that happens in the jungle. And I would have been at a complete loss if I'd only done the training in the jungle and not done my Tribal Detox training. So shout out to Tribal Detox and Jason Fellows. And then also I think that there's a beautiful thing. Like if somebody's serving medicine, I do think absolutely go and meet the frog because it changes everything. And so let's talk about the frog because it was like so exciting. So I like, oh my God, this frog is so freaking cute. And he's like in a way really ugly and like alien like, and like he's so ugly, he's absolutely gorgeous. But let's talk about what it was like meeting the frog, because I think for me, I was really taken back at how sweet this frog is and how gentle and how slow and like kind of seemed like he was a little trusting. And I know that we talked about this in the last episode, but the Kambo frog, Phala medusa bicolor, lives in the Amazon basin in these trees, and it has no natural predators. And it's really hard to get the medicine because you have to go in the water into these trees to get the frog. And I think maybe that's why he's so gentle, is that he doesn't have natural predators. And so I was taken back at how sweet this frog was and how we were able to just hold him, and how he had the ability to jump away, and he did a couple times. There were, we captured a bunch, and sometimes they would jump away, but most of the time they would just hang out on our hand or hang out on our shoulder. There was one that we took medicine from, the other people took medicine from, and we wanted to take it back into the jungle, and you put him on your shoulder and we walked, I don't know, 10 minutes. And then when I took him off your shoulder, he wouldn't even leave my hand. I couldn't even get him back onto the branch, um, over to the water. So I just found them to be a little bit smaller than I expected them to be, because they're called the giant monkey frog or the giant leaf frog, and they're probably like, they fit into my palms. They're not as big as I expected. And then they feel really good. Like their little
Hmm.
foot pads are really gigantic and strong, and they just feel really good. And I found them to be really gentle and really zen. And even when we were extracting medicine, when they were like supposedly pissed and angry, they were pretty laid back
Yeah.
but angry. So what was your experience of meeting the frog, and like what was your expectation, and how was it different than maybe what you expected?
Yeah, I expected to be a little grossed out by them. They look kind of weird, and I make them like, we're gonna harvest a secretion off this frog that we're gonna like stimulate in anger until they like produce this milky white substance that we're then gonna like take off their back and put on a stick. And I thought this is really weird, um, but I don't know. There's something about the nature of this frog that is just, it's so zen. It is like the definition of calm. And they exude this sort of like ease and naturalness. And when you're holding them, you just like, you kind of like enter into that wavelength with them where you find yourself sort of settle in and get very calm and get very quiet. And there's like this reverence that I felt towards this frog. Like I felt like I was holding this really powerful, really sacred creature, and I wanted to protect it. At the same time, we were like tying it to a chair and like milking it, which I felt kind of bad doing it. I have to say, like, I
Well,
didn't want to
let's
hurt it.
before we jump into that, I mean, I definitely want to jump into the milking process, but let's jump into what it was like to get the frog, because, and I mentioned this in the
Yeah,
last podcast, it's one thing to serve Kambo off as a stick, and to, have somebody ships you a stick, and it comes from the Amazon, and then you serve it. It's another thing to like make the stick. We made the sticks, we made the tools, we hunted the frog, and we extracted the medicine. And so let's talk firstly about the stick. They're just making the
yeah,
stick. So the stick was made of teak, the ones that we had, but it has to be a wood that doesn't absorb like liquid, and it has to be very
mhm.
smooth. So our Cambosero was the one that kind of hacked this piece of wood up to make our sticks, and somehow he made them the exact same size, the exact same width, the exact
With a
same,
machete,
with a
with a machete.
machete. Yeah, with a machete, and it was like a pretty big piece of wood, and I don't even know, it wasn't a quick process for him to do that.
Mhm.
Um
And then we
and
sanded it for like an hour.
and we sanded it for like an hour. We kept saying, "Okay, is it
Yeah,
good?" And we'd hand it back, and he's like, "Nope, more." And we'd sand it. So it took him, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes to cut our sticks from a piece of wood, to make them the same size and to make them the same width. And then, yeah, we sanded it for an hour because he wanted it absolutely perfectly smooth so that the medicine
yeah.
would go on properly. I was surprised by how long it took to make a stick.
Hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah, a lot of respect for that process of just making the stick itself, and then we had to make our tool, made our spatula. So it was like a kind of like a spoon on one end, or like a flat kind of like a spatula, very tiny, and then
Tiny.
a point on the other end, to apply them. And that's also made from the same wood. It's also made from the teak. Um, and so that also took an incredibly long time to sand down and make the right shape. And one of the things we learned in the jungle was the importance of the wood versus using a metal implement,
Yeah.
because the metal could potentially oxidize the combo secretions and sort of reduce the effectiveness of it, is what we were taught, which I thought
Yeah.
was interesting because you've been using like a little blunt metal,
Yeah. And
like,
everyone uses like a knife, so I thought that was
yeah.
interesting.
And so that was very different, but I actually found it very easy to remove the medicine from wood with a piece of wood. And so we made our own little tools, which was really cool. Actually, I kind of added to this sort of specialness, in the sense of learning how to serve the medicine and to have our own tools to then serve it with. So that process, I actually kind of underestimated how meaningful that was. That was actually one of the more profound parts of our
Mm.
training.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, you think like in our training, we're handing out sticks, and then you don't realize somebody hand cut that stick. Nothing is made with machines, and not to mention that they have to go out and get the wood and everything else. So we didn't even see that part. But just cutting the stick, making them the same size, and then sanding that thing down is insane. And then we went out to hunt the frog. It was midnight. We were pretty bombed and tired, which is an understatement. And we were so first of all, we're in Iquitos, which is in the Amazon basin. So when I say I got 150 mosquito bites on my body, it it was no joke, and they all swelled up and they went through my pants, so my butt was covered in them, mostly from that evening. And so we had boots on that were like up to our knees, and we had our little flashlights, and we're going with Don Gardell, who is our Cambocero, who's amazing and has a beautiful relationship with these frogs. We walked in the jungle for an hour and a half before we found the first frog, before we heard the first frog, before we heard it. And so we were walking through all kinds of mud, and we would take a step and then we'd take another step and drop down like a foot. And we were holding each other up and plowing through the mud. And then
In the
he would
middle of the jungle.
in
Oh
the
yeah.
middle of the jungle, in the middle of the night, with all these like crazy sounds and crazy creatures. And then he would stop and we would get really quiet. We'd turn our flashlights off and he would call the frog.
Maybe
Yeah,
not.
nothing would happen. And then finally, after an hour and a half, we heard the frog. And, but then you hear it and then you have to find it. And then when I say when they're, over the water on these trees, they like Don Gardell was the one that went trouncing through the water to get it while we stayed at the water's edge and got bitten by mosquitoes. He was the one that was going there. I don't even know where the sounds were coming from, but he knew how to call them and then they would respond. And then we had to spot them with a flashlight, and then you had to capture them. So an hour and a half walking through the jungle before we even found a frog. We were in the jungle walking from midnight until 3 a.m. We found 4 frogs. We brought back 4 frogs. The way that they did it was he cut a stick. I actually kind of like this. He cut one of the branches of one of the trees that they hang out in, and then he ties them to the tree, which we don't love,
Just
right?
one leg, just one leg.
Yeah, he ties one leg to them, and then I'm walking around with this big kind of like piece of a tree, trying to get through the jungle, trying to get through the jungle. And he's making the path with a machete because there's no path in the jungle. So he's literally creating a path everywhere we go, and he's hacking everything with a machete. So I was impressed with like, all right, it took us an hour and a half to get our sticks. And then now it took us an hour and a half before we found a frog. And then it took us 3 hours to find 4 frogs. So we go back to camp with our 4 frogs. And it took us an hour and a half to extract the medicine.
Yeah, probably. I mean, because there was one that was kind of had a skin problem and wasn't making a lot of secretions. He had nothing to give us. We didn't mess
We
with
didn't
him at
use
all.
him because he had a skin
Yeah.
issue. So that
And
was
then
like, so then we
another
were down to
one,
3 frogs.
and then another one produced just a little bit, like maybe not even half a stick. And you only take, so you either take from the front legs and the body and leave the back legs, or reverse, like you leave some medicine on their legs, so you don't take from all the frogs. They have some medicine to protect themselves. Um, and so one didn't produce very much. We kind of left it alone. And then we had two other ones, and they weren't even that big. The ones that had one was big,
One
the
was
other one
big.
was pretty
Yeah.
small. But between those two of them, they made basically like 3.5 sticks, which was kind of surprising. I was actually shocked at how much
Mhm.
medicine. One of them specifically made like 2 sticks by themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the one I had, I kept thinking I was doing it wrong. I probably was because it's being a little gentle. Like you have to
Mm,
be. Yeah, I mean it doesn't feel good to get the medicine and the frogs get pissed off and I don't think it feels good to them. But they're not harmed in the process. And they're strung up and if you see pictures of the way that they're strung up, they're literally like their arms and legs are spread in like for like a starfish and each of them is tied to a post and it looks awful, but they kind of just hang out and they don't protest. And then when you're done and when you untie them, I do think they're a little exhausted. I
yeah,
found that when we took them back, they didn't have as much vigor and as much energy. And I felt like they were really a little exhausted, but they're
stressed them
not
out. Yeah,
harmed. They're not hurt. As I was taking the medicine, I was thanking it for helping so many people, for serving us and for helping us. And I know with full confidence that Don Gardell at Cambo has so much reverence for this medicine. Like there was one point where I was being really gentle with my frog, so I don't think he produced a lot of stuff. But there was medicine dripping off, and he's like, "Don't waste the medicine," like because I wasn't, I didn't see where it was coming off. But they're very careful not to waste the medicine and to use the right amount. And I did find that when we were finished, they didn't just one of them ran off, and then the others kind of hung out with us. One of them ended up what one night went way up into the rafters of
and the
the
Maloka, and
of the
just hung out there
Maloka
all
and
night
just
long.
yeah, and just watched us.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they're harmed, but I do think it doesn't feel good and that they do get angry and they get pissed off and you have to push on their glands really hard to get that medicine and it can't feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we have you have to stress them out. That's the only way they produce their secretion. That they do it as a self-defense mechanism, and so if they're too chill, they don't produce it. So the fact that you have to actually agitate them and stress them enough kind of speaks to just how mellow their nature is baseline, right? Like it does require quite a
Mhm.
bit of either pressure and or kind of agitating them for them to make it even in the first place. And so I don't know. I found a lot of like humility in working with the frog and a lot of respect for the way that the medicine's extracted, that process. Um, I'm feeling really just really humbled that we have to anchor this little creature that's so peaceful and chill, but that the medicine that it produces from its anger is so powerful. It's also really interesting and how intense that medicine is when you use it. To know that it comes from this creature that really is like the definition of peaceful, calm, still, quiet.
Mhm.
Um, it's sort of this weird kind of paradox.
Yeah, I mean, it took us 4.5 hours to go and hunt 4 frogs, of which only really two produced medicine, which made 4 sticks.
Yeah.
So if you think about it like that, it's hard to like picture what goes into all of it, but it's not like they're all hanging out and that there's a plethora of them and you just call them and they come down and he was wading through water and he had to get a
We almost
stick.
gave up. We almost gave up. We were like about an hour and a
Yes.
half. We were about to give up, and I remember you just being so despondent. You were like, we're gonna go hunting for frogs. This is the last night we can do this. We're almost done with our week, and
I
we're
was
not gonna have this
so
opportunity."
upset.
And it was the last place that we checked, and all of a sudden,
Mhm.
and they were all like responding, call and response to him, and we were like, okay. And then there was one there, and then there was another one over here, and there was one over there,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they were all in this one area. But it was
Yeah,
the
we were
last place
walking
we checked.
back. We were walking
Yeah,
back and we were like calling it a night. And then yes, that's right.
it's like
Yeah.
2 a.m. in the morning, and we were done, and all of a sudden they popped out of nowhere.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different ways. to apply medicine. So if people tuned in for the last episode, we talked about wet application. And so that means right off the frog's back, wet into the gates, which a gate is where you do a superficial burn on the body so that the medicine can enter through the body and it gets into the lymphatic system. And so we were told that that method is double potency. And we talked in that last episode about how the onset was super fast and it was really like powerful and intense. And of course, the only place that you can do that is in the Amazon basin where they are. So that's a
I
unique
was,
experience for people to have, and I don't think it's a common one that Westerners will get the opportunity
yeah.
for.
Just to correct you, you said wet. Wet refers to the water you drink before. That was fresh combo. Wet refers to the water you're drinking before you apply the
Yes,
medicine.
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yes, and yes,
yes,
it's wet combo, and
fresh
it's
fresh
and
combo.
we drank water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fresh combo.
So
Let's go ahead and
yeah,
say
fresh
fresh
combo.
combo. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So wet method refers to you drinking a liter to liter and a half of water before applying the medicine. So we did fresh combo the first day, wet, meaning we had water before we applied it. Because our purge was relatively clean, we did dry the next day. So if you want to speak to that, let's talk about what
So
dry
yeah,
combo is.
so wet too. One of the things that's important is that I learned in the tribal detox training, and we were told not to drink more than a liter. I think a liter and a half, you're still gonna be safe, but I'm gonna go with a liter. It's important to drink that as fast as you comfortably can without it being super uncomfortable within 10 minutes, because after 10 minutes, your body goes into the digestive process. So what you can't just drink it and kind of take your time. You need to drink that water pretty quickly, and then have the medicine applied. So that's that wet method. What we next did was dry, and I really like dry. So they won't do dry typically in the jungle unless you've had a clear purge, which we talked about in our last episode about like the purging process, or if you're coming in pretty clean. And so they do want people to purge and kind of release out all the things that aren't serving them. And if they feel like you're kind of in a cleaner space, then, and that means mentally, physically, spiritually, all of that, then they'll allow you to do dry. And so that is without taking any water in. And I found that experience so much easier. And I see the benefit of wet so much. And so I would say with the Western way of serving, where people only come in every 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, I'm going to always serve it wet with the water, because I do think that that purge is not the most important thing in the world, but is pretty important. And it's only if somebody's doing a series over a number of days would I be willing to do the dry, or if they are very, 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 very clean, with their diet, with their spiritual practice, with a strong meditation practice and things like that. So when we did it dry, don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy, but it was way easier. And so I'm curious to hear your experience of the dry, meaning we didn't drink water.
Yeah, I think real quick, I just want to touch on one more thing about wet versus dry. I think one of the things that they were teaching us in the jungle was how to kind of diagnose your patient or assess your patient based on their response to the combo. And so one of the ways you assess them is what they purge out. Another thing that they look for is what they call frog face or swelling of the face.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that actually is that if you have a really high sugar diet or you eat a lot of carbohydrates, or if you drink a lot of alcohol, you tend to get a lot more frog face. And so what we actually saw during the retreat is people who came in and had their first day had really bad frog face and swelling after they were there with the food that they were serving us, which had no sugar or no refined sugar in it. And it was also pretty clean, low carbohydrate. No one had frog face again.
Yeah.
And so I think there is something to these things. I mean, you can talk about what might be behind some of these symptoms from a chemical or medical standpoint, but from a kind of an assessment of the people you're working with and of yourself and your health, if you don't have this frog face, then you know you're cleaning stuff out. The body's getting cleaner. And the first day you did your first combo, you had frog face and a lower purge, but it wasn't that bad. They felt pretty like clear that you were good to do dry the next day.
Mm-hmm. But in my
But then you
but in
didn't
my
have
tribal detox training, man, I had frog face. I've got photos of it. My
uh-huh.
face blew up, my lips blew up. It looked like I had Botox in my lips, like everything blew up. And I and I was like, now I understand what frog face is. And when I went to the jungle, I had been on a diet a week before with no sugar, no salt. And so I did get frog face, but it was pretty mild. And then I didn't get it the rest of the week.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
I think there's something to that. The dry method, I think, was a lot easier in terms of the physical symptoms. There was still the contraction and kind of the like pain in the gut a little bit, but it wasn't as severe. I didn't have any purge. I still had all the flushing and the fast heart rate and some like cramping in the gut, but overall it was pretty mild. And again, it had a little bit more of that kind of meditative quality. It was a little bit more of the subtlety of the medicine. And I think I did 2 or 3 points.
Not easy though. It wasn't
Not
easy, but it
easy.
was easy in comparison.
Yeah. And so that was the dry method with reconstituting it off the stick. And then we learned another method of dry, which I thought was really cool, which was one of my favorites. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So also they believe in acupressure points. And so when we had some like hard days, they are like, well, we're just going to give you a stress point. And so they did it on that spot where between your thumb and your pointer finger, where if you push down, you feel like a little bit of pain. And so that was a stress point. They also did one dot one night on me where it was like for
Protection.
protection. Yeah. But the way they did it, they call it the dry method. And so dry meaning we didn't drink any water. And this I'd never heard of before. And I thought it was really cool was you get the stick and you scrape the medicine off dry and it kind of scrape it into like a little bit of a powder. I feel like it's a really good use of the medicine because you don't use very much. And you create like a powder and then you dab the powder. Did we use any water on it? We didn't.
No water at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, so
No.
you dab the powder onto that point, and that was that acupressure point that we talked about on the hand. And I found that one point pretty potent. Actually, I was
Yeah.
surprised at how potent it was.
It's completely undiluted. So it's like
Yeah.
extra concentrated medicine. And you only need very, very little. It was interesting because I was starting to get a little bit of like a sinus, back of the throat, kind of cold, like illness after we left the jungle because we weren't sleeping at all. We slept hardly at all because you get eaten alive by mosquitoes every night. And so I did this little stress point on my other hand, the one that they hadn't done in the jungle. And immediately it cleared up and went away,
Mhm.
which we can talk about some of the medical benefits in the next podcast. But I thought it was really interesting that even just that one little point with the tiny little bit of medicine that I put in was enough to kind of clear out whatever that brewing illness was.
Well, and they said I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't recommend this, but they did say they don't use that method often, but if somebody can't tolerate medicine another way would be a reason that they would do that dry method or for animals. So if you have a
Mm.
sick dog or a cat, you give them that medicine up their anus. I'm not recommending that. I don't even think I would trust myself to do that with my own pet, but the people there in the jungle swear by it, that it helps the animals. And I guess if I was desperate enough and something was going on with my animal that was bad enough, then I might try that. But it's not something that they do often, but they did teach us, and I really liked it on the stress points.
Yeah, they talked about applying it to specific areas that had inflammation or pain. They talked about using it with acupuncture needles. Like if you're someone who's already an acupuncturist and you have that practice and that knowledge, you can combine it with the combo, or you could just do the points in where you would put a needle and just do the combo there instead of
Mhm.
with an acupuncture needle, which is really fascinating. And so knowing that there are other ways and other kind of modalities that actually pair very well with combo was really cool to kind of understand different ways that it can be used
Yeah.
therapeutically.
Well, and I also thought it was interesting because I know in the Western training, they kind of call this on BS on it. And in the indigenous, they really believe if you're having knee pain, then do the combo points on the knee. If you're having shoulder pain, do it on the shoulder. The jury's out for me on that about like maybe there's that pseudo effect. If people have experience and I would love for them to comment in the comments if they have experience. As I learn more, I'm going to play around with that placement piece of it. I know a lot of people come to me and they want it in a certain place. They think they either want to hide it and they don't want the scars to show, or they want the scars to show and it like a badge of honor or like a tattoo. Um, and but I'm curious about the placement and if your knee is having pain, and I'll experiment with myself too. But if anybody else has experience around that, I would love to hear their thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I had you apply it to my right shoulder blade and kind of right upper back because I was having a lot of back pain because our beds were awful.
Yeah.
And it actually really helped. I felt a lot of
Mm.
relief in that muscle pain and tension that where you applied it. So I do think there's something to it. One of the things that we kind of demystified a little bit was spinal points. Um,
Yes, let's talk about that.
yeah, let's talk about that. So I think one of the things that's interesting, and I don't know if you want to pull this up or we can do it in the next podcast, is that
Oh, I'll pull
the
it up.
way that Kambo is absorbed into the body is through the lymphatic system. And if you know medicine, you know the lymphatic system follows the major blood vessels of the body, kind of
So
runs
hold on one
parallel
second.
to them. Yeah.
To pull this up, and if people are listening to the audio version, this is definitely something you want to look at on the video version.
Yeah. So if you don't
Um,
have access to video, you can Google the lymphatic system and you can find all these pictures online that kind of map out where the lymphatic system, the large vessels and the large lymphatic nodes are. So anything that is along these pathways is going to be more potent. And so you can kind of see there's a lot of them concentrated around the neck, especially like where like the parotid glands are and axillary, the armpits, in the groin inguinal area.
mhm.
And so anything that has a large concentration of lymphatic vessels and nodes is going to absorb that medicine more rapidly, and it's going to be a lot more potent system. And so what's interesting is that there's actually no lymphatic vessels or even blood vessels along the vertebra of the spine. And a lot of people will say that spinal points are more intense, but in reality, if you're applying it directly on top of the vertebra, on the bone, it actually does absorb much more slowly. And I've had this experience with people putting points on my lumbar spine, my thoracic spine, and it not being as intense as when I put it on my shoulder. And if you look at the map of where your vessels are, there's a whole bunch of them on the outside of your shoulder. That's a very intense point to put them. However, if you put them on the sides of your spine, that's where your major blood vessels run, your aorta, your cava, these massive vessels. And so those are very potent points to put them on the side of the spine, but directly on the vertebra isn't dangerous in and of itself. If you were to put them around the armpit area or along the inner arm here, those would be very strong. The groin would be very strong. One of the places they told us not to put it is on the neck or the face. And I think one of the reasons for that is it can cause a lot of angioedema or swelling of the throat because it's a potent vasodilator as well as there's this process of inflammation that happens. Sometimes you feel like you have like cotton mouth, where it's really difficult to breathe, but you can
Mhm.
still breathe. But I think one of the concerns is that if you put it here on the throat, along the neck, that you could actually cause your airway to shut down, have too much swelling. And so that's just an important point to know.
What about around the heart?
So this is one of the things that's interesting. A lot of people say to avoid the heart, especially in the front. We've seen people who've had points placed on the back of their heart, like on the back area, and I think that's
Mhm.
probably safe. But I
But
think
it's best to
there's
avoid it. Like, there's no need
yeah,
to do that really
yeah,
if there's a question mark around it.
yeah. I think there's like these folklore tales of people putting points on their heart and dying with combo. I don't know how much validity there is to that, but I think you just better not to mess with it. So, but you can use this map as kind of a way to figure out kind of where, if you want it to be more potent, where you could place these points kind of along like the inner leg, the inner arm, outer arm. You can do the groin area but they told us to avoid the genitals, so not to place them like directly on your private parts.
Yeah.
But other than that, like your body's your canvas, and you can kind of have at it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we've covered a lot. I think the next podcast that we're going to do, we're going to go deep into the medicine around it. That's your specialty. Of the science around Kambo, the contraindications, the medical considerations. I think we can also deep dive into the emotional, spiritual, and physical aspects of the medicine. I think for me, just really quickly, I just want to touch on this before we end. Um, for me, like, let's talk about what makes us keep coming back to it over and over again. Because if it didn't work, people wouldn't keep coming back to it, and people do keep coming back to it. There's a huge amount of people they're coming back to this medicine regularly. And for me, the physical piece was, I didn't realize until I did Kambo how my body was out of balance. I just didn't, I was so normally out of balance that I just didn't even notice it. And then when I did the medicine, you don't notice that day. You notice the next day. Nobody notices that day. Like, some people might feel it that day, but most people are going to feel it the next day. And what I felt was the brain fog lifted. I had more energy. I felt good. I just felt different in my body. And my body felt amazing. And that was so profound that that's what makes me keep coming back to the medicine. And then there's this spiritual piece, and I think it all goes together, right? And what I was telling you before is, when I come back to it seems to be about every 5 weeks is where my body's like, okay, I'm needing it again. And I look at the calendar and it's like 5 weeks. And what I feel, if I was living in the woods or in the jungle or something, and life was a little bit more zen, I probably wouldn't need to come back to it as often. But I think sometimes I get derailed. I get derailed with news, and I get derailed with responsibilities of being a wife and a parent and working and all these responsibilities and managing a schedule and social media, and I get derailed. Like, things happen in life, and I get knocked off a center. And I feel like for me, the Kambo brings me back to center. It brings me back to myself. It brings me back to who I am. It brings me back into my body. It brings me back into my soul. And it gets me feeling my absolute best. It optimizes everything in my life. And then, things happen and shit happens in life, and then I get derailed again, and it brings me back. And so there is this like spiritual element to it, and there's this physical element to it, and there's this emotional element to it. And I think when you sit with the medicine, it's about, for me, it's been about, like, the lesson in it for me has been about surrendering to the medicine, trusting the universe, trusting myself, trusting that I can get through this process, trusting that I'm going to be able to release all the shit that doesn't serve me. And however that needs to be released, if it's through purging, upper, lower purge, if it's sweating it out, if it's shaking, if it's crying, like whatever it is, like, that I need to release, it's going to come out in that Kambo session. And the more I trust and the more I surrender and the more I lean into it instead of fighting the process, the more it's going to benefit me. And I think it would be crazy to think that we don't get derailed in life, and that we're always zen, and that things are always like working well for us. And so I also think that there needs to be a reverence for the medicine, and it's good to not overuse it. And it can be a crutch, and it needs to be medicine. And it needs to be revered, and it needs to have a space and a time. And you need to mentally prepare and come in with an intention and be in a place where you can fully surrender. It's not a medicine to be taken lightly. It's not a medicine to just microdose all the time. I know there's a lot of like whatever about microdosing, and microdosing is way easier and you're getting the peptides. But I think go in, have a full treatment, get all the peptides that you need, release all the stuff that you don't need. And so that's what brings me back to this medicine over and over again. And I know everyone, it comes back for different reasons. And so what is the reason that you continue to come back to this medicine?
I think you said it beautifully. I think the lesson of the frog is surrender. Um, I think in our modern lives, we're fighting usually against all these things that are happening, all these stressors, all these obstacles. all these things that we want them to go a certain way. We're trying to like exert our will in the world around us and make things happen the way we want them to. And we have this like struggle, there's obstacles that we encounter, and that's really kind of against the natural flow, the natural rhythm of life. And I think the lesson of the frog is just to surrender and to just let be what is, um, to be with what is. And that is what kind of came to me in the jungle, that lesson to be with what is, and to be in flow. And so for me, the frog brings me back in touch with that. It brings me back in touch with my like true self, my grounded self, myself that's connected. And so anytime I feel off balance or there's something going on physically or emotionally and things feel chaotic or in turmoil, the frog is really like this deep reset for me. So that's why I keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. We're going to do one more episode. So this is 3 episodes. If people didn't tune into the last one, they should check that out. And then the next one, we're going to deep dive into the science, which is definitely your wheelhouse. So thank you for being on here, and thank you for taking this journey with me with this magical little creature that's changed our
Mm.
life.
Thanks, babe.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Community Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I can be found at www.nikkiyoga.com, NICKYYYOGA.com. Until I see you again next week, I hope you have a beautiful day.